listening to The Granite Discourse, a New Hampshire-based podcast with real discussions. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. And for early access, subscribe to Patreon for just $1 a month. Thank you, and enjoy the show. Check. All right.
Dynamite.
John Sununu.
Great to be here.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
How's your day?
Good. Up in Conway for a little bit, a couple of hours. Went to the Conway Sun, did Sun TV, enjoyed it. Yeah.
How was their studio?
It's nice. It's actually a pretty full size. It's in the in the back of the offices there, and I think they've been doing it for a while.
Now, you've been there before?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, Conway Sun was a thing. Same building, I think, 30 years ago when I first ran for office. Mark Orang, who kind of runs it, he was joking that he calls me John, and he said, should I call you Senator? I've never called you Senator. I've always called you John. And I'm like, no, that's totally appropriate. He met me, knew me when I was, first running for office. I was a small business guy, manufacturing guy, and the rest is history. So,
what did you do before politics?
I grew up in Salem, went to Salem High School, and went to engineering school. So I'm trained as an engineer. I worked in manufacturing. I worked in technology. Ran the operations of a small electronics firm in Manchester for about 3 years. And there was an open house seat, and I just basically asked the question, what kind of a representative would I want? And, I thought, I don't need another lawyer down in Washington. Nothing wrong with being a lawyer, but Congress is filled with lawyers. I thought someone with a small business background, technical background, would help, build a company, hire employees, train employees. And that was my pitch when I first ran for office. So, yeah, my background's technology, engineering. When I left the Senate, I really went back to that same stuff. And I've worked mostly for high-tech firms, small and large, innovative companies that appeal to my engineering background, my problem-solving skills. So, I've been lucky. I've enjoyed my private sector work, and I think that's a big benefit, right? To have someone who's actually worked in the real world when they take that experience to Washington.
So you ran for Congress first. And what year was that?
96.
96.
Yeah. I mean, you're obviously dating me, but at the time, I was probably the second or third youngest member elected to Congress that year. Mm-hmm. And served 3 terms in the House and then 6 years in the Senate. What
year did you run for Senate?
2002.
2002, so you went from one to the other.
Yeah.
So what was it, what was your main platform for running then? Like, what was the atmosphere in the country at the time?
For the House or the Senate?
Let's start with the House.
As I said, the atmosphere was a country where economy was starting to really grow. New Hampshire, in particular, really starting to grow after the recession, the 91, 92 recession, which was really tough. It was sharp, especially in New Hampshire. And I came to the race with a small business background, New Hampshire manufacturing background, and that's sort of what I took with me to Congress. And look, in the House and the Senate, I have a business degree, so served on the Budget Committee, served on the Commerce Committee, dealt with telecom issues, broadband issues, internet, anything having to do with tech and innovation. I wrote legislation to ban internet taxes. So in the Senate in 2007, was able to get that bill passed, even though at the time we had a Democrat leadership. So it was my bill, Republican bill, and was able to get it done. And look, my pitch at the time, and it's true today, is whatever I was working on, I wanted it to be something that was impactful and important to New Hampshire.
Was that the same time that we got rid of the deficit? We had a surplus?
Yeah, 2000. We wrote a budget agreement in 98. I was on the Budget Committee at that time. And look, that budget agreement cut taxes, but it also made some important decisions to control spending. And that was the key. And by 2000, we had balanced the budget. We're starting to run a surplus. And it underscores for me the importance of controlling spending. Mm-hmm. You don't balance a budget by raising anyone's taxes. Lots of states have tried that. California, New York, and we've even tried it at the federal level. No, we're going to raise taxes, but we'll only do it on the rich. But of course, everyone ends up paying more, and deficits don't go away. You balance a budget one step at a time, and you do it by controlling spending.
And that was a bipartisan.
It was, and look, it was a bipartisan agreement. Republican Congress, Democrat president, and it does show you, look, if you really want to make progress on a big issue, and you want it to stick, a bipartisan agreement is really the best way to do it if you can get one, right? If you can get one. And, even in the teens, when Paul Ryan was Speaker of the House, they got a budget agreement that put in place spending caps. And that helped start the deficit going in the right direction, going down year after year after year. And look, that was a bipartisan agreement, but it capped spending at a reasonable level, and that made all the difference.
And so after we had a surplus, what was it that reversed that surplus? I
mean, the biggest thing was the war in Iraq.
Yeah.
Which pushed spending up. Post 2008, you had the financial recession.
Yep.
Which pushed spending up. And look, the mother of all spending increases is what we did during COVID. And the spending during COVID was over the top.
Yeah.
And then immediately after COVID, just as the economy is starting to recover, they passed the Build Better Act and the Inflation Acceleration Act, which was more spending, really reckless spending, and that's what drove inflation up to 9% a year, right? 20%. We had 20% price increases over a 3 or 4 year period. And, wages didn't keep up with that. And that's what people are feeling now.
What is the solution to that?
One, cut spending.
Yeah.
Okay. And the Congress this session has done that. In the big bill, they stepped up and did what I think is common sense. They said, if you're able-bodied and don't have dependents and are getting Medicaid, you should be looking for work or volunteering or have a job, right? Mm-hmm. A work requirement. It makes sense, but it saved hundreds of billions of dollars. They put in a provision that said, if you're an illegal immigrant, you're not eligible for Medicaid. And the Democrats said, well, it's already the law. And we said, well, then you shouldn't have a problem auditing it and proving it, every 6 months. So things like that cut spending. We also cut taxes. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, which I think is great for New Hampshire workers. And that has driven up our economic growth. So, last year economic growth was almost 3%. Hopefully we'll have 3.5%, 4% growth in this quarter. Wages are growing now, finally. Last year and a half, growing faster than inflation. And that's the key to dealing with some of these affordability issues. You got to have workers' paychecks increasing faster than inflation. We've done it for the past year. We need to keep doing it and fight a little more on that affordability front.
But we need to win the midterms to do that.
Absolutely. Look, to me, the midterms are about not going back. We cannot go back to the reckless spending and 9% inflation that the Democrats gave us. We can't go back to the tragedy that we saw at the border. Tens of thousands coming across the border, hundreds of thousands a year illegally. I mean, a tremendous amount of suffering at the border. And we were told there was nothing that could be done about it without a huge piece of legislation. Well, that turned out to be false, right? We've seen the enormous improvement of security and stability at the border. We don't want to go back. And on taxes, we've got a tax code that's in place, cut taxes, made them permanent. We've got an economy that's growing. We don't want to go back to higher taxes. No, we don't want to go back to making workers pay more. And so we want to lock in these gains, protect these gains. We're going to need a Republican majority in the midterm.
As you're going around New Hampshire, what are you hearing from voters primarily?
Look, a lot of economic issues, to be sure. Some of the things we talked about, people definitely want to see us cut the deficit.
Yeah.
Get back to a balanced budget. Now, the important thing, maybe the most important thing is, last year, 2025, the deficit was lower than 2024. This year, 2026, we're on track for the deficit to be lower than 2025. And every year, we need to make sure we're doing the right things, keep the economy growing, control spending, and keep that deficit going down. So people are talking about that.
So is that basically how it happened in the 90s? It wasn't just 1 year where they were able to just wipe it out?
No. I mean,
would that be too much of a shock?
Well, yeah, I don't think you can get there in 1 year. No. And again, for the economy to benefit, what's most important is that you just get it going in the right direction and then keep it going in that direction. So, I think it was a 3 years between signing the agreement and actually hitting balance in 98. I can't predict can we do it in 5? Can we do it in 10? Again, if we get things going in the right direction, if you told me, well, we're going to balance the budget in 10 years, I'd take that in a heartbeat. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Look, affordability is a real issue because as we mentioned, under the Democrats, prices went up 20% over a 4-year period. We've got inflation down. Today there was an inflation report, inflation 2.4%. So it's been kind of steady. So that's terrific, really important for workers, really important for people's paycheck. But on things like healthcare, we can do so much better. Congress has messed up our healthcare system terribly. They told us, we'll pass this bill. You'll have more choices.
You're talking about the ACA?
Yeah. Yes. They said more choices. We have fewer. They said prices will come down. Premiums skyrocketed. They said you could keep your doctor. Nobody believed that at the time, and it turned out to be wrong. So what do you do for healthcare affordability? 1, competition. Right? Let companies sell their health insurance policies across state lines. 2, the cost of regulations. Talk to a doctor. Talk to a nurse. How much time are they spending dealing with paperwork every day? 15 or 20% of their time. That's real cost that we can take out of the system because most of these regulations were written decades ago, when they were still filling things out on a pad and paper. Price transparency. Nobody knows what anything costs.
No, you go to the doctor.
No,
you
nobody
go to the
knows.
emergency room and you get bills for months to come.
Yeah. What does it cost for a service at the hospital, at an outpatient clinic, or at the doctor's office? There's a big difference. And we should have full price transparency so that people know where's the best place for me and my family to get our health care. And health savings accounts, another choice, an option that should be available to everyone. We shouldn't restrict who can get a health savings account and who can't.
Are they restricted now?
They are. Yep.
To who?
People on the ACA exchanges aren't eligible, for example. Yeah, sure. Yep.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
Um. So how was healthcare before the ACA? Because I remember before the ACA, I had a reasonable deductible, and I had a reasonable premium. And once the ACA came in, it just skyrocketed. Was that because they forced everybody to get insurance?
Well,
because once you force somebody to buy a product, then you can pretty much charge them whatever you want, right?
One, the way the ACA is structured, they're giving subsidies to the insurance companies, and the way the insurance companies increase their profits is to increase their premium. Okay? They don't really have an incentive, the insurance companies themselves, to drive down the cost of care. That's not how they make their money. They make their money by covering more people and raising their premiums. So that was one of the fatal flaws, if you will, of the ACA. And they also took away a lot of the things that I was talking about, right?
Yeah.
Options, choices, competition, and certainly pricing
Because you had to
information.
buy it through the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just get insurance any time of the year?
Well, companies were much more inclined to offer individual policies to someone who didn't have coverage. So there was more competition in those individual markets than you have today under the so-called Obamacare exchanges. Also, the way the incentives work in the system, there were a lot of employers who were covering insurance before who gave up on that. You know? So the key is we can address some of these problems. We should be addressing them with more choices, better price transparency, and lowering costs. And costs aren't lowered by spending more money. Costs are lowered by doing the things I talked about.
Why do they try to convince people of that?
Convince people of what? That if we just spend more money,
that we can just make everybody's lives easier.
Well, because it has some attraction. If a politician says, "Oh, I'm going to give you an extra $100 a month in subsidy, or an extra $200 a month in subsidy," right? And that feels good if you're the one who happens to be receiving that money, but it doesn't make what you're purchasing with that, like a health insurance a policy, it doesn't make it any better, any less costly, any more efficient, or improve it in any way.
Yeah.
So look at throwing money around. Is something Congresses have done for years, and it rarely solves the problem.
Trump's talked about eliminating the income tax. Do you think that that's ever in the cards?
I don't think that's very likely. I mean, I think it'd be really tough. Now that's the kind of thing that if someone has a comprehensive proposal for how they do it, I mean, I'll look at it, but I don't think it's likely to happen. The history of the world, and certainly the history in the United States, is once we have a tax of some sort, it's really hard to get rid of it. Yeah. Right?
It's like temporary tolls.
Exactly. Now, here in New Hampshire, we did get rid of the interest and dividends tax, which was a good thing, which is a type of income tax. And in a lot of states have imposed a sales tax in order to reduce their income tax. But frankly, they just end up with a sales tax and an income tax. We're lucky here in New Hampshire that we have no sales tax and no income tax. And frankly, the far left was telling us 30 years ago, well, we can't go another year or two without a broad-based tax. We need a sales tax. We need an income tax. We can't survive. This was 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, even in the early 70s. There were Democrats who insisted that New Hampshire needed a sales and or an income tax. Okay? They were wrong. They were wrong. And we need to make sure we don't make the mistake of falling into that trap of believing, well, if we just had an income tax, we could cut property taxes. Or if we just had a sales tax, we can cut property taxes. The history of every state that has bought into that argument is that ultimately their overall taxes go up, their overall spending goes up, right? And let's be clear. New Hampshire hasn't just gotten by without a sales tax or an income tax. We have thrived. We have the healthiest economy in New England. We have the lowest poverty rate in the country. We have some of the best schools in the country. We have the lowest unemployment rate in New England, certainly one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. Our economy is strong. We have strong local government, and that makes New Hampshire a really special place to live and work and raise a family.
What made you decide to want to run this term, this election season?
It just was clear to me how important this race was. Important that New Hampshire has someone in Washington who can get things done, whose voice is gonna get heard, who has the right kind of background and experience. You know, we talked about problem solving, small business, innovation, technology. That's what I want to see in our representation in Washington. And a track record of writing legislation important in New Hampshire and getting it signed into law. And I mean, nobody else who's in the race really can say that. Chris Pappas hasn't accomplished anything during his 8 terms in the House other than voting in lockstep with the Democratic leadership every time, which is not good for New Hampshire. I wrote a legislation to expand the protections of the White Mountain National Forest. I wrote the law I talked about, banning internet taxes, important to New Hampshire's tech and small business economy. I stood up on the Patriot Act to protect civil liberties, free speech, protect against big government surveillance, and won. And look, some of those bills were bipartisan, some of them were partisan, but we were successful. It was the right thing, certainly for New Hampshire. And in the case of the Patriot Act, I actually had to take a stand against a Republican president and a Republican Senate because I thought they weren't doing enough to protect personal freedom and civil liberties.
Did you get attacked for that?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, editorial cartoons, op-eds saying, what's Sununu doing? But look, in the Patriot Act, we gave law enforcement, we gave the federal government new powers, new subpoena powers, new surveillance powers. And I and a handful of others who I co-sponsored wrote legislation that said, okay, if we're going to do that, we need to make sure we have protections in place. So for the warrants, you have to have a reasonable standard of evidence. If you're served a warrant, there shouldn't be a gag order preventing you from telling anyone about it or getting access to a lawyer. If you have a roving wiretap, right? You can't. The federal government shouldn't just be able to listen in on anyone's conversation at once. If they have a wiretap, that's roving. In other words, not one specific place. You either have to specify the individual, and so now you have the right to listen in on their conversations as they move around, but you have to have a warrant for the individual, or a place. Okay, well, this is a meeting place for a lot of people that we are suspicious of for a reason, so we're going to listen in on that, that club, that room, that home. Okay, so again, these are technical kind of law enforcement issues, but all we're trying to do is balance
guardrails,
the power of the state with the protection for the individual. And look, long story short, we stopped the Patriot Act, added many of these protections successfully. At the end of the day, though, the government still abused these powers. Democrat governments, Republican governments. And it just reinforced for me that we were absolutely right to raise the concerns. We were right in what we did. And, in hindsight, I wish we had done even more. But it was a fight worth having. And I think people are even more attuned to it now because we were willing to stand up and have the fight.
That's around the same time they implemented they presented the Real ID, right?
Yeah, Real ID. So I opposed Real ID when it came up, refused to support the legislation, wrote letters insisting that it be pulled out of a pending bill on the Senate floor, and we got it out. The supporters later stuck it in another bill, though, a must-pass bill, that ultimately, because of the nature of the bill, it passed the Senate 100 to nothing. But it was just sort of slipped in there. And that's how Real ID went into effect. And then I introduced legislation to try to roll back pieces of Real ID. Look, I just thought it wasn't necessary. It infringed on, the state's power and right to issue their own identification. And I was concerned it would become a de facto national ID. And it has. And all of that was on the record at the time.
Do you think that, because all this stems from 9/11,
Yep.
Do you think that the procedures we have to go through when we go through the TSA, do you think those are still necessary?
I think those should be comprehensively reviewed. I think many of them probably are not. Look, the key was to harden the cockpits, okay, and come up with procedures so that planes could no longer be taken over and used as missiles. I think that's essentially what 9/11 showed us. So that was the real risk. So in instituting better processes for vetting and controlling the pilot access, hardening the cockpit doors, et cetera, beyond that, a lot of it is unnecessary, I think. And, we probably are way less efficient than we need to be as well. We unionize the TSA employees. It's become its own very complex and big bureaucracy. And at the end of the day, that we probably made the system a whole lot less efficient in what we did.
Yeah, because they fail tests all the time where people can sneak through guns and weapons.
Yeah.
So how do you think things are different now from then, as far as the atmosphere in Washington? Now you got to figure, you were a senator 20 years ago, and there's a whole generation that's probably gone, and now there's a whole nother generation that you're competing for the vote.
I know, I've kept in touch with a lot of people in the Senate, even some of the newer members, John Kennedy, Bernie Moreno, these people I've spent time with. I think they're pushing for and doing a lot of the right things. But having been there, even though it was 15, 18 years ago, I know how it works. I know how to get things done. I know how to be effective. I know how to be an advocate with the administration, with the White House. And again, we need that, right? We don't have a Republican representing New Hampshire and Washington. It makes it really hard for our delegation to be effective advocating for things New Hampshire needs. And because most of the delegation is going down there just trying to pick a fight. So that's an opportunity to do so much better, to be more effective for New Hampshire's veterans, for New Hampshire small businesses, for New Hampshire's healthcare system, and even our state government. We've got challenges to deal with: Medicaid funding, job training money, education funding. I'm a strong believer, the fewer strings attached to that money, the better off New Hampshire will be. Because New Hampshire administrators and parents and teachers know far better how to use our education funding than anyone in Washington, D.C. And giving us in New Hampshire more power and control over that money is going to be good for our schools, good for our students.
When you first went to Washington, what was it like from somebody did you spend a lot of time down there before you were a congressman?
No. As I said, grew up in New Hampshire, went to school in Boston, came back to New Hampshire to work, in the 90s, was working in Manchester. Mm-hmm. So, no, never really spent any time in D.C. until I was serving in the House. Was it different than today? Yeah, you didn't have internet and social media. Maybe it was a little less partisan, but we certainly had our partisan battles. I mean, there was the Clinton impeachment. There was sort of the partisanship that built around the war in Iraq. So, every generation faces its tough issues. Today, there's a lot of partisanship. The Democrats obviously spent a lot of time impeaching President Trump, and unfortunately, that just heightened the sense of tension. But I know I can get things done, and more importantly, I know I can advocate effectively again for New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what we really want. Just someone who's effective, someone who breaks through all that noise, someone who's not afraid to stand up and fight when something is really important in New Hampshire. And that's my history.
But as a young man, what was your expectations when you went there?
What was my expectation? In other words, what did I expect to accomplish, or what did I expect to see?
Somewhat both. So did you get there and then realize, like, okay, it's more dog eat dog down here than I thought, or?
No, I mean, I always enjoyed the work.
Yeah.
Early on, I realized you've got to make a decision if you really want to be successful and effective. How do you want to achieve that?
Mm-hmm.
And there are really three ways to do it. One, you can work your way into the leadership, right? The whip and the majority leader and the Speaker of the House and the Senate whip, same thing. All those elected positions, that little leadership has power. They really do, because they shape what bills are taken up and what time, et cetera.
How hard is that to do?
Not that hard. I mean, I think you have to be compelling. You've got to throw your time into it, make an effort. You got to work with your colleagues. You got to convince them that you're the right person to choose in one of these elections. So there's elected leadership.
Yeah.
You can sort of work outside the system, build a following outside of Washington, and then try to leverage that to get Congress to take up issues. Now, someone like a Ron Paul,
mm-hmm.
when I was in the House, Rand Paul today, John McCain, Tom Coburn, who was a senator from Oklahoma. These are examples. Bernie Sanders probably fits this mold. They're kind of mavericks.
Yep.
Their base is, they may be playing to one side or another, but they build up a base and get a following. The third approach, which is really the one I took, is to become really strong on policy issues, work on committees, become an expert on a legislative issue or set of issues. And so for me, that I was focusing on budget issues, tax issues, and technology issues. Right? Those were areas where I put in a lot of time, a lot of effort, and as a result, was able to pass legislation. But I realized that early on in the House, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to spend time working on legislation, helping to shape legislation, and helping to be a leader on those issues. And then really the other thing I realized early on is I wanted to commit myself to giving New Hampshire the best constituent service of any member in Congress. And I think we really did that. We had offices all around the state. We were effective. We were responsive. And we were always recognized for that. And that's a big part of the job, whether you're in the House or in the Senate. You have to be there to respond to your constituents' needs.
How long would you have to spend down in Washington?
I mean, you're there when you have votes.
Yeah.
So, in the House is designed as a dictatorship. You hope it's a benevolent dictatorship, but there are 435 members. If the Speaker, Democrat or Republican, didn't have real power, it would be a chaos. It would be a free-for-all. I mean, it's tough enough when you have a very 4 or 5 seat majority. But even with lopsided majorities, you need a speaker with power so they can keep things moving. So as a result, we would often know, your first vote is Tuesday morning, last vote of the week will be Thursday evening, and you could get home to New Hampshire, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then just head down to D.C. for the votes. The Senate was a little tougher because the majority leader, in this case John Thune, he doesn't have those powers. He can't just set when he wants votes to occur. He has to get agreement with Democrats in order to set votes at particular times. So the Senate tended to be in session a little longer, 5 days a week, a little more consuming in that way.
What are your views on term limits?
I've always supported them. We had a number of votes in the House back in the day, and I think I voted for just about every term limit measure that came up. But what happened is some people supported only only 6 years of service. And if you had taken a pledge to support that and then voted for a 12-year term limit, they would criticize you and come out against you. And so the 6-year thing failed, the 12-year thing failed, the 18-year thing failed because people would only vote for one instead of voting for them all, because they were afraid of people in the term limits movement criticizing, which is absurd. I think if you had a limit of 12 years in the House, 12 years in the Senate, or even 18 years, right? What you're trying to address with term limits is no career politicians, no 30-year, in the Senate, no 40 years in the House. And so even if you set it at 18 years in the Senate, say, that's a reasonable limit. And heck, most people would probably only serve a couple of terms anyways.
You think so?
Yeah, I do. If you had the limit of 3, a lot more people would just serve 2 rather than do I really want to serve that third term?
Why do you think New Hampshire has no representation in Washington and hasn't had any for so long?
Well, 2018, 20, and 22 were tough elections for Republicans. We had a lot of candidates on the Republican side who were running for office for their very first time. And that's tough, even if you're a good candidate, strong individual. If you have never run for office before and have, no reputation, no brand, no name ID, that's going to be real tough.
Did you hold office before you were a congressman?
No. I mean, look, everyone has to run for office for the first time at some point. I'm simply saying that it's a big obstacle when you're first campaigning, and on the Republican side, over the last few elections, that's one of the challenges we've had. A lot of first-time candidates for the House and Senate.
What are your views on energy policy?
And I think we're finally starting to deal with energy with a little common sense. And here it's about affordability too. Okay, so how do you deal with energy costs? One, we've got to take advantage of our natural resources. We have to produce more. Domestic oil and gas, and we're a huge producer now of oil and gas, but we need to keep identifying the best locations, the best areas to permit. We produce this stuff more in a more environmentally sensitive way than we ever have before. The U.S. does a better job with our environment than any other country. So, yes, do we need to produce more oil and gas? Absolutely. Second, infrastructure, right? If you want to take advantage of our domestic energy resources, we need infrastructure to get that energy and that power where it's most needed.
That's kind of up your alley right there.
Sure. Gas pipelines, right? Electricity transmission. So we need permitting reform. And what that simply means is if someone is trying to build a new piece of infrastructure, they should be able to get a yes or no on their federal permitting in 18 months, right? They should get certainty. It doesn't mean everything's going to be approved, but it means they know if they make the application, they'll know in 18 months if it's approved or not. And that makes all the difference to a company that's, taking a risk, putting up capital in order to improve our energy infrastructure. And then look, the taxes. Chris Pappas voted for $100 billion in energy taxes in the Build Back Better bill, and people in New Hampshire are struggling with their home heating bills.
Yeah.
And so again, it's just out of touch with New Hampshire, doing the wrong thing because that's what his party told him to do. He supported a gas tax increase when he was first elected to Congress, and that's not. We shouldn't be increasing federal gas taxes right now. So. Look, we can do better on energy. I guess the last thing I'll mention is nuclear power. We've been fortunate in New Hampshire to have Seabrook, which has been safe, very efficient, consistent, producing electricity for New Hampshire for decades. It would be great if we could find the right opportunity to expand that facility, whether it's building the second unit that was originally planned, or using the new small modular reactor technology to sort of expand the production footprint there. But there's great opportunities.
You think we could become energy independent?
Oh, no question. There's no question.
How much red tape is there in Washington that stops the average American from doing anything with their own property or towns from building their own infrastructure?
There's not too much at the federal level that would affect, say, the average homeowner, the average small business, trying to expand. There can definitely be wetlands restrictions or permitting that come in from the federal level in addition to the state level. A lot of the local the city and town infrastructure, right? Whether they're trying to do something with roads or bridges, wastewater treatment, that can be affected and slowed down by federal regulations. Even building a new cell tower, which can be a real public safety issue. If you don't have good cell coverage, again, the FCC wants, they can just sort of shut something down for a whole lot of reasons, even if something's been approved by the city or town for communication purposes.
How do we simplify the tax code?
Well, when I was serving before, I supported a flat tax, just going to sort of a big, generous family standard deduction and a simple rate.
Does that go all across the board to everybody? Flat tax?
Yep. The rate would. Obviously, you make more, you pay more because you're paying a percentage. Today, really, we've got as simplified a code as we've had probably since the 80s. Reagan did a big tax reform bill back in 1986. And then, what happened was what always happens. People start tinkering with it and it expands, and then they want this deduction or this loophole, or maybe the Democrats, they raise taxes, they raised them under Obama, they raised them under Biden, and it gets a whole lot more complex. And with the 2017 tax bill and the most recent one, the big bill, we've really simplified our corporate tax structure and simplified the individual tax structure. I think there are 3 rates now on the individual side. My feeling is it's going to be hard to improve on that. And if we start opening it up again and trying to, simplify it, it'll end up getting more complicated, not simpler. I'm all for trying to simplify it, but we're in a pretty good place right now with the big bill. We've made most all of the provisions permanent. And, if you go back just a couple of years, people were talking about, well, this is going to expire. This tax cut's going to expire on the individual side. This tax relief is going to expire on the corporate side.
Why do they expire to begin with?
Because they're playing budget games. They're just playing budget games. So if we only do it for 4 years or only do it for 6 years, it will cost less when we do the score, right? Because the budget committees have to do a score and an estimate as to how much it will cost, how big of a deficit it will or won't create. And so they say, well, we'll just do this tax change for 5 years. They know it's going to have to be extended. So it's a lot of gimmickry. It's wrong. Right now, though, under the big bill, they made almost all of this stuff permanent. So you don't have big things expiring, and so that will not give Congress opportunities to mess it up. So I'm of the mind it's pretty good. I'm not excited about suddenly blowing it open again and trying to change things.
The big bill, where's the most spending cuts coming from that will actually lower the deficit over time?
Yeah, the two that I mentioned on Medicaid.
Yeah, Medicaid.
The work requirement and preventing illegal immigrants from getting access to Medicaid. Those are the biggest. There were some changes to food stamps, the EBT, electronic benefits for food assistance, to sort of, again, tighten those requirements as well. And now, based on what we're seeing and reading about, there's a tremendous opportunity to cut the fraud that we're seeing in social services. I mean, we saw about all of the social service and early learning fraud in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And this is in the billions of dollars. And today I saw in California under Medicare for the elderly, tremendous amount of hospice fraud. People stealing identification of the elderly, enrolling them in hospice coverage without their knowledge, and just collecting money from the federal government. So, look, the amount of fraud is striking even to me. And having been working in Washington, I've seen a lot of wasted money. But that's an area where I think we can go back and do an even better job. Because look, that's money in the case of Medicare that should be going to ensure that the healthcare program for seniors works as efficiently as it can. And, when you're siphoning off $2 billion, $3 billion, $10 billion a year in fraud, it's a travesty.
So you were a big supporter of DOGE then?
Well, I think DOGE was kind of like, I don't want to say bull in a china shop, right? It wasn't the most elegant operation, but it needed to be done. We needed an organization to highlight where government was spending money that it shouldn't be, whether there was fraud or just funding programs that weren't effective. I mean, a lot of the foreign assistance programs that were being funded were just being funded because it'd been funded for 20 years, so why not keep funding them?
You mean USAID?
Yes, many of the programs within USAID, absolutely. So DOGE certainly highlighted them, highlighted their failures, and in the end, we passed a new international operations foreign assistance bill that funded the State Department and foreign assistance programs that cut 16% and actually received bipartisan support. So it just underscores that, yeah, they were probably pointing at the right things because we're meeting all of our international needs, where we're providing foreign assistance. It's much more aligned with our national security interests, and that's what Secretary Rubio's been talking about. And look, there's probably even more opportunity to save money. And so hopefully that the kind of review that we went through at the beginning of 2025, even though it was a little painful and a little clunky at times, you need to do that. If you want to spend taxpayer money wisely, you need to do that once in a while.
How'd they get away with so little oversight to begin with?
The short answer is that the federal government spends so much money, no matter how hard Congress tries, it's difficult to exercise tough oversight over all of it.
It's crazy.
It is. But the federal government is huge. I mean, it's
too big.
It is too big. It is too big. And so, and the federal government, is probably still doing a lot of things that might have been right for the federal government to do in the 1950s or 1960s, but probably not today. I think a lot of our transportation funding can be just, left at the state level or given to the states without a lot of interference from Washington. Here's one. Job training. We have 7 or 8 different job training programs at the federal level, and they all target slightly different things. Workers who lose their job for competition or technology, or just targeting workers in a certain industry or supporting community technical colleges. Rather than have these 8 different streams of funding, why not just give all of that to New Hampshire, all of New Hampshire's money, without strings attached, and let New Hampshire decide how to invest in worker retraining? Because what we need is going to be a lot different than what California or New York or Texas needs.
Well, I was wondering that because I remember there was a seatbelt law that came in 15 years ago or so, and I think the Department of Transportation wanted to give funding to the state of New Hampshire if they accepted a seatbelt law. And we didn't accept it, so we didn't get the funding.
Yep.
But we already sent that money to Washington in the first place.
Exactly. They're just trying to sort of hang it over our heads and control what we're doing at the state level, and that's wrong.
I'd like to see that the size of the federal government does get shrunk down because it's too big. I never understood why we send money to Washington just for them to send it back, and there's probably less money than.
Yep. And there are areas we can cut outright, and I talked about the foreign assistance. But even if we were just to hold the growth to 1% per year or 2% per year, but less than inflation, again, that would push the deficit in the right direction because our tax revenues are growing. Our economy is growing faster than that. Our tax revenues are growing faster than that. And so you slowly whittle down that deficit. Now, I think we can do better than that. Don't get me wrong. But, this is about just having a little discipline and not continuing the out of control spending. But, the Inflation Reduction Act, and I call it the Inflation Acceleration Act, it was reckless spending as the economy was surging, and it gave us 9% inflation, the highest inflation we have had in America since the 1970s. And we're, everyone pays for that. Families pay for that, workers pay for that. And that's what's really made it so tough on the affordability side is that inflation that was given to us by the Democrats overspending.
How do you think we're doing with immigration right now?
Well, it's amazing to see, that security and stability at the border we talked about earlier, for months, for years, as we watched thousands and thousands coming over the border illegally. You saw the suffering at the border. The Democrats insisted they couldn't do anything about it without some huge bill. This is Chris Pappas, just parroting Joe Biden. No, we need immigration legislation to do something about the chaos on our border.
Would that legislation just lead to amnesty?
Who knows? But the real truth here, though, is they didn't. Right? They obviously didn't need that legislation. They were misleading the American public. So we've got stability and security on the border. We can't go back. If people are here illegally, committed crimes, they should be deported. And, again, if you poll that question in New Hampshire or in the country, should illegal alien criminals be deported? People say, yes, of course. People should be held accountable. And then the next piece, though, is one you alluded to, which is, okay, what about the programs to allow people to come here legally, right? Yeah, we definitely need those programs. We need them to work in an efficient and modern way, right? We need seasonal workers here in New Hampshire. We've got a great travel and tourism business in the summer and the winter, and having seasonal workers that support that, important. Agricultural workers, yes, we have immigrant agricultural workers. We've had them in America legally for 100 years or more. So you have tech workers, healthcare workers, right? We should have visa programs that work in these areas efficiently and that are controlled to allow people to come here legally. Now that we have the border controlled, and now that we obviously have a commitment to deport people who have broken the law, I think the next step would be to work to fix those programs. I think we can do it.
So, we're talking about people that have come here legally to begin with.
The programs that allow people to come here legally,
right.
Yes.
But under Joe Biden, I've heard upwards of like 10 million people have come here illegally.
Yes.
And not all of them are violent criminals, but they did come here illegally. So how do we, because that's a big strain on our housing,
mm-hmm.
on our public services,
mm-hmm.
Our welfare state. Like Ron Paul always said, you can't have open borders on a welfare state. So how do we deal with that?
Well, I think of the way that I described, right? You're fixing these programs that allow for legal immigration, and that creates an opportunity for people to apply, for people to be compliant with the law.
Mm-hmm. So out of all the congressmen and senators that you know, or the ones that are serving now, who's your favorite?
John Kennedy.
John Kennedy?
Kennedy's an interesting guy. He's a friend. I think he, a lot of his, phrasing and some of the funnier things and wittier things that he said, it really does come naturally to him. But he's smart, and I think he's very, very sincere, very honest. Tries to be very transparent, and that's a good model for anyone. And I mean, I don't think, I'm not John Kennedy, that's for sure. But his willingness to do homework, to study hard, to understand issues, and to be transparent, those are things that anybody who's interested in politics should study and should follow. John Thune and I were elected together to the House years ago, so he's a good friend, someone I've always been good friends with and close with. And then there were some new members, Senator Sheehy in Montana, Bernie Moreno in Ohio, that I think are really strong. Haggerty from Tennessee, strong on issues. Moreno, a lot of technology issues, crypto issues. Sheehy on defense, is a former SEAL, national security, and Haggerty on foreign policy. They're thoughtful, they're tough, and they really make an effort to solve problems.
So when you win, will this be your only term, or will you be running again?
I don't know. I'm not. The good news is, and I do think this is good news, and it's important, I think, to voters. I'm not worried about serving 2 terms or 3 terms. I want to do a great job for 6 years. I want to stand up for New Hampshire every day, fight for New Hampshire on issues important to us every day for that 6-year term. I've been fortunate that I've served before and been able to serve effectively. I've worked in the private sector. I've raised 3 children in New Hampshire, and they're grown and have nice careers of their own. So I'm just focused on this term, 6 years, give New Hampshire the right kind of voice, the right kind of leadership, and be a senator that will make people in New Hampshire proud.
Do you have any websites anybody can go to? Any social media?
SununuSenator.com. And all of our social media links are there. All the information about the campaign, volunteering, supporting the campaign. Do follow me on X, on Instagram and Facebook. That's a new part of the campaign, obviously, than say 15 years ago. And it's a great one. I mean, it gives people the opportunity to see, things I'm doing, where I've been, obviously get the latest information about an issue or position. I've had a great time with this campaign, traveling all over the state. As I mentioned, I was in Conway today. We did a veterans forum last month in Lancaster, Republican women's event over in Keene earlier last week. So, you've got to get everywhere and talk to people. Even if a lot of people aren't paying attention right now, you've got to reach out and let people know you care, listen to them on the issues, and be ready to do the right thing.
Do you run your own social medias?
I have posted a few, but in this day and age, it's good to have another set of thumbs, as it were, checking everything, making sure that it looks good and that the spelling's right.
It doesn't matter. You can always have typos. Yeah. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
John, thanks for stopping by.
Hey, great to be with you. Look forward to coming again.
All right.
Thanks.